Welcome into this championship discussion. I'm Program Director Michael Knight, joined alongside Wagner head coach Dale Condict, and the Wagner Bulldogs are now back-to-back Class 4A state champions. Coach, first off, congratulations on the accomplishment. Not only do you win the state championship, but you do it in a perfect season.
Yeah, perfect season on just a unbelievable last few minutes of a game that, will be one that would be hard for me to ever top in a coaching career or, kids as a player. To win a championship game on literally the last play of the game, the game was decided. So it's been a very challenging year for many of us, but ultimately a very rewarding year, and was certainly happy to see our players get to accomplish a 14-0 season and another state championship.
We're going to talk a lot about that state championship game, the guys who made that championship possible. Wagner had such high expectations coming into this season after winning state a year ago. And, Coach Condict, you'd be the first one to say how many guys you had coming back off of last year's team. And so with that, the expectations are obviously high. Throughout the season, did you ever sense that got to the kids in the locker room or on the field where they kind of just, I don't want to say mailed it in, but they knew that, look, we're the best team in the state for a reason? Did you ever sense that from your squad?
No, probably not until maybe halftime of the championship game the other night. You could sense definitely some concern and some urgency. But as the season unfolded, I felt like they really stayed focused on what our goals were. And, it was a very enjoyable group to coach. They had a great attitude, and they came, for the most part, had good practices. And, I felt like they stayed very focused. But now, hey, after a half of football where Oologah played the defense they did against us, when you're used to just being able to move the ball at will on people, it was very concerning and very challenging, and felt like it brought the best out in a lot of people.
Oologah and Wagner have become such great rivals, especially in Class 4A, over the last couple of years. And look, it takes a while for a rivalry really to pick up steam, but I think just in 2 years alone, after meeting the Mustangs in back-to-back championship games, luckily Wagner was able to be on the golden end of those championship games with Oologah. But I think it's safe to say that the Bulldogs and the Mustangs, that rivalry is here to stay, especially in Class 4A football.
Well, it sure looks that way, and it's a healthy rivalry. I think that we have fed off of each other, and we've made each other better because we know how good the other team can be when they're at their best. And I know when we're preparing and throughout the season, I really felt like Oologah would be the team that would be back in the championship against us. And, they have a lot of good players coming back next year. We have a lot of good players coming back next year, so you never know. Obviously, we'll have to play once during district play. But I'm sure both teams would be more than excited to play again and one of us win a state championship in 2016.
Let's talk about that state title game, because I think for a lot of people it was probably closer than a lot of people expected, simply because there were such high expectations. Once again, we go back to the expectation word where, a lot of people looked at what Wagner was able to do against Oologah, not only in the state title game a year ago, but in the regular season. Despite Oologah dealing with some injuries, they had some guys back from that regular season meeting. They saw the halftime score. They saw Oologah jump out early and think, oh man, maybe we I don't want to say overrated Wagner, but maybe we didn't give Oologah enough credit. What did you tell your kids in the halftime locker room? You mentioned at halftime maybe the guys were again, you don't want to just say they were ready to just roll it out, but what did you tell your kids at halftime of the state title game?
Well, the first thing that I remember was that I felt like, they were being more physical than we were, that they were taking the game to us and us not to them. So we discussed we just had to play harder, we had to play tougher, and we had to find a way to grind it out and score a touchdown somewhere. And then, Coach Bryan, our defensive coordinator, I remember him telling them, if we can come up with 2 turnovers in the second half, we'll have a great chance to win. And the defense just played unbelievable in the second half and really bailed us out because, calling offensive plays, Coach Humphreys and myself really worked well together with that, Coach Alexander, and we just never got into an offensive rhythm the entire game. And there's very few times that you walk off the field a winner when you don't get into any kind of offensive rhythm. So it's a tribute to a couple of guys that made huge plays on offense, and then a defensive effort that was second to none.
Let's talk about the man of the hour, Nakia Jones, who caught what would end up being the game-winning touchdown with under a minute left. Nakia, only a sophomore, burst onto the scene last year as a freshman. Really in the second half of the season started showing flashes of what we've seen all year this year as a sophomore. Coach, with Nakia, we talked on Saturday during the show about the timeout right before that play and how he came over and basically said, look, give me the ball. And you mentioned how with big-time players like Nakia is, granted he's only a sophomore, but still great potential, and he's already shown flashes of what could be down the line. You want your big-time players to be in that situation and say, look, get me the ball under any circumstances.
Yeah, he did, and he's really a pretty soft-spoken guy, so it wasn't real aggressive. He was kind of looking at me and said, just get me the ball. And it'd be a lot better than if I looked at him and said, hey, are you ready for this? And he's like, hey, maybe you ought to go a different direction. But, I think most people that know football and were at that game knew that in some capacity we were going to try to get him the football on that last play. And fortunately, we had worked that formation for a couple of weeks after A.J. Freeth's injury, because I was concerned if we got in a situation like that, somebody would put a guy pressed up on him and then have a guy play behind him and just make it really difficult for us to get him a chance to catch one. And boy, sure enough, it paid off. And he got out and got in some one-on-one coverage, and with his size and ability to jump, it's hard to defend him. And perfect ball thrown by Malcolm, and we knocked the extra point through, which people probably don't remember that. That's not easy for Alex Wisdom's a senior kicker, and I asked him in that moment how scary is it to go out there and have to kick that extra point when the whole championship's on the line? He said, Coach, I was shaking from head to toe. He said, I was teared up. He said, I just punched it through. So a lot of big plays by a couple kids there at the very end.
We're going to talk more about AJ and how he's doing with the shoulder injury. He had to miss the playoffs, which for a guy like him, you hate to see that in your senior. But talking about Nakia right now, you had mentioned earlier this year how it's crazy just on the foundation of it. He's only a sophomore in high school, but you said he had NFL talent, which I understand. Look, he's a big receiver. He's got good speed, good hands. He did on the game-winning catch, he caught it at its highest point. So I understand where you're coming from. But that in its own puts pressure, on a high school kid. How has he accepted that this year?
It's hard to say because he's so quiet. He doesn't talk about it a lot. He's not a real arrogant kid in any way. So I don't know if he really has comprehended how good he's doing, which is a good thing, because really, he makes a play as a freshman in the semifinal game that basically put us into the championship that year. And then obviously this year he makes a couple of big time catches to help us, win a state championship again in the finals. So, he's got things he has to improve on. And he's going to have to be willing to put time in off season in the weight room, speed training, and all those things. As far as God-given ability goes, he's about as good as I've ever been around. And it seems like he's progressing at the rate that we hoped he would. There's so many variables that go into a young man being extremely successful in a sport, and especially football, as competitive as it is. Is he going to do well enough in the classroom? Is he going to stay focused throughout the 4 years, stay injury-free? There's just a lot of variables, but I feel like he's on the right pace at this point to do a lot of great things.
I'm right there on the same page. I think he already is one of the top receivers in the state. The 2018 class, which is that current sophomore class, is absolutely loaded with players who more than likely will end up playing Division I football. Nakia is definitely one of those players. We mentioned A.J. Freeth, the shoulder injury. Again, you hate to see that for a senior who has meant so much to this program, not just this year's team, not just last year's team, but to the program in general. Honestly, for me, covering high school football, I feel like I've heard the name A.J. Freeth for about 7 years now. That's how much he's meant, where makes an impact immediately as a freshman. When he went down with the shoulder injury, what was your first thought, and how have you seen him progress this month with being I don't want to say a cheerleader, but an extra coach on the sideline helping out those young guys despite the fact he isn't able to play.
Well, and just because a guy's a great football player, that don't mean he's a leader. But AJ is, and he was our most positive senior leader when he went down. So it affected us in a lot of ways. And I knew, the day we got the call from the doc that he was not going to be able to play, it affected everyone. We tried to slough it off and go on, but the coaching staff, I know for sure, it seems like those things may affect the coaches more than it does the players. But just knowing that we weren't going to have him in the same capacity, but it took after that first week, AJ really struggled through that first game, having to watch, and you could just tell it really bothered him. But he figured out his role was still to encourage kids, to do all that he could to be there for his teammates, and he did a great job of that the last few weeks of, continuing to show up and encourage and be there for everybody. And I told him after that game that we wouldn't have been there had it not been for what he contributed the last couple of years, because he gave us a confidence that we couldn't replace at that point. And I think because of the way he played and several others, but he was one of the key ones that we were walking with a swagger that maybe we wouldn't have had we not had AJ Freeth all the way along the way.
Let's talk about your quarterback, Malcolm Rodriguez, kind of one of the unsung heroes of this team, just simply because this team's loaded. I mean, there's guys everywhere. KJ Leadon, we've talked about Nakia Jones, AJ Freeth before the injury. Rodriguez really manages it all. Last year as a sophomore, that was kind of his role. It was just to not make any mistakes. This year as a junior, what have you seen from him kind of evolving at the quarterback position?
Well, the first thing that took place is he grew a lot in the off season, which allowed us to do more things with him. He probably grew 3 or 4 inches last year, gained about 30 pounds. So, his durability was going to be a lot greater, which allowed us to run him some more. And we didn't run him in all games. We kind of picked the games we felt like we really needed him to run. And, Friday night, that's one of the things that surprised me. I mean, he was able to run a little bit, but I think he carried it 19 times for like 50-something yards. So the yards were very tough to come by for him. But he has really progressed in a great way, threw for 2,300 yards and several touchdowns. I think 31 touchdowns. And so really his junior year, he grew by leaps and bounds, and I see him continuing to progress into the senior year of being one of the better players around, because people that haven't watched us play and they hear Malcolm, they think quarterback, but I'm not sure if his best position is not safety, because he is a very physical, very aggressive safety that has a knack for the game. He's great in coverage, but he's like a linebacker as far as coming up and making tackles.
This time last year, we sat here and we talked about the improbable run that Wagner made after the slow start of the season to go on and win that state championship. Now, fast forward a year, and we have 2 of these gold balls sitting here. When you look back on all your teams here at Wagner, and you've had some really good ones, some teams that couldn't get it done, some teams that finished the job and have won state championships, this year's team, how special is it, and could it be your best since being here?
And we do that coaching. So that's what we do in the off season. We compare teams. We pick our all-decade team, and that's fun to do. It's really hard to compare them, but I guess really all you can say is this team finished 14-0, and no other team in school history has done that. And they did it after a year where you knew everybody was coming after you. When you're on top, people are coming after you, and they're going to give you especially the good teams are going to give you their best effort. So very proud of them, and to overcome a couple of injuries that were significant in the playoffs, and we could have laid around and used those as an excuse when you lose your best player. We lost Patrick Curley early in the season. A lot of people don't even know about Patrick yet, and he's one of the finer football players on our team. He'd probably been one of our best 5 or 6 players this year, and went out with a knee injury in the second scrimmage. So one of our best linemen, P.J. Hubbard from last season, moved. So we had to overcome some things, and the kids just seem like they've gotten to the point where they get on the field, they expect to win, and it's a great feeling to walk out to battle with guys like that.
Back-to-back state champs. We talked about it even in this conversation last year, how when you look at everybody who's coming back, immediately the expectations are high. Fast forward a year once again, and they're still high. I think you always hear, especially big networks like ESPN, they pick the way too early favorites and start predicting the next year immediately after the season is over. And I think the early favorite in 4A is going to be the Wagner Bulldogs for good reason. You get your quarterback, Malcolm Rodriguez, back. You get Nakia Jones, who's turning into a star. KJ Lee, who has been doing phenomenal things since he was a freshman. I think Wagner is once again still going to be on top. You've dealt with the expectations now. You talked about how your team has been able to deal with everybody going after them with their best effort. Now you start to get into dynasty talks where, look, if you get a third straight, you're joining pretty small company as far as Oklahoma high school football is concerned. How do you go into the offseason knowing that, for guys like Nakia Jones, all they know is state championships?
Well, I think you have to just remember to stay humble and focused on your next game. And that's what we did this year. Let's just go one game at a time. I think you have to continually make it fun. I know I try to have a great time coaching. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. The kids aren't going to keep coming back and keep winning. And, you mentioned a few of those guys. You got Cameron Dumont and Chris Murray, who have started for 2 years at corner. Scotty Patton's rushed for about 2,300 yards in his 2 seasons as a tailback. Orlandis Robinson's really developed as an offensive lineman. Art Webby, 2-year starter on the defensive line. I mean, we could go on and on down that list of kids. This group that's going to be seniors next year, we knew as they were coming through junior high football, they were going to be very special. Now, were we expecting a possibility of 3 state championships? I'm not sure about that, but we knew they had a chance to be one of the better groups that we'd ever had. And, the sophomores behind them were really good too. So the future is going to be bright. It's going to be a lot of fun. Next year the class has changed some more. There's going to be teams out. A team called Heritage Hall coming in that everybody talks real highly of. I've actually seen them on film a little bit, and if they're in 4A football, they're right in the middle of it. They would be a team that if I was playing them Friday night, I'd be concerned about them. So there's always new challenges, and I wouldn't say that the pressure will get any less by continuing to win, because then people start talking about how many. And they've already talked about how many we've won in a row, and then that just seems like that continues to grow. So try to just stay focused on the next game and bring your best effort.
You say the future is bright, and if everything remains the same here in Wagner, we'll be talking this time next year. And I think we might need a new table, because I don't know if we have room for a third gold ball. I know that that's the plan. We might have to get a new table for next year.
Hey, if we win another one, we'll find a way to buy another table.
All right. Coach, first off, congratulations.
Appreciate
and thanks so much
man.
for sitting down with us.
Well, thanks for all your coverage.
This has been a championship discussion on OKPreps.com. Stay tuned all week. We got championship discussions with Bixby, Jinx. We're even making the trip all the way to Southwest Oklahoma to talk with those Altus Bulldogs who won 5A over the weekend. So be sure and stay tuned to OKPreps.com. We'll also have championship discussions next week, as well as 3A, 2A, and Class A will crown their state champions later on this weekend. He mentioned the Heritage Hall Chargers. They're going after their second straight state title. We'll also have live coverage of that game on Saturday afternoon in Stillwater. He's the head coach, Dale Condict, of the 2-time 4A state champion Wagner Bulldogs. I'm Michael Knight, and this has been a championship discussion on OKPreps.com.